Our first book, written in stone, the 1990s, is up for pre-sale in our Patreon, the Secret Stoners Club. This book covers the stories from season 1, some with updated details, and includes a full bibliography, timelines of important events in sport climbing, bouldering, and big wall free climbing, more thoughts on climbing history and how we interact with it, and full-color illustrations. Becoming a Secret Stoner is free, and you can pre-order the book for 20% off right now. The link is in your show notes. Season 2 is generously supported by RAB, one of climbing's most historic brands. Founded in 1981 by climbers, for climbers, RAB are on a journey to reduce the impact of their business, expand access to the outdoors, and preserve our mountain playgrounds for future generations. RAB, the mountains are our meeting place. When discussing climbers who helped shape the climbing in Wyoming, the name Steve Bechtel has to come up. He's been an important part of the community in Lander since Wild Iris was first being developed, and now runs a gym in town, Elemental Climbing and Fitness, as well as a climbing coaching company, Climb Strong. But we aren't talking training here. What's more important to this podcast is that he was there with Skinner and Piana, often side by side, developing sport climbs and big walls around the world. I wanted to talk to Steve because, well, I'll explain that as soon as we jump into this episode. I want to dive into Todd and Paul and your history with them first, but then I want to talk about them as people, community builders, all of that, because I think those are the things that get often lost in talking about their accomplishments.
Yeah.
Right? You know, and especially when it's something like the Salathe, which has been turned into this controversial thing by, future people climbing on it for whatever reason, questioning what Todd and Paul did. We definitely lose the humanity in there. Yeah. And, I never knew Todd, but I know Paul and I know who he is as a person. But I want your perspective, having known these guys for a long time.
Yeah.
So first, I would just love to know, how did you end up meeting them?
Well, I met Todd in the summer of '87, and I was 17 and was climbing with Steve Petro at Fremont. And it worked out really well for us because I wanted to learn climbing, and Steve had basically no partners. Had he
just burned off all of his partners?
He had. Like, he was kind of came up climbing in Casper, and then went off to Laramie and started climbing with Todd and with Bob Scarpelli and with some people. He went to Laramie for a couple of years for school and came back, and he was better than everybody. And he got a view of the national scene and went to Yosemite and did a few things. And he and Arno Ilgner were partners at that time, like 84 to 86. And before Arno moved back to Tennessee, and they were just like, what's hard? Let's go do it. And they believed in free climbing. And so they just got better. Both of them had that athlete's mindset. Yeah. And that's how they kind of got to know Todd. And Todd and Paul had been active in Vitavu in the early 1980s, and were like, whoa, these things can be free climbed as well. And there was a lot of this like 5.9A1 stuff going on. And so they just started ticking off all these 512s to the point probably in the early 80s, Vitavu maybe had the highest density of 512 climbing in the whole country. Maybe there were more total 512s in Joshua Tree or at the Gunks, but just for how many routes there were total, it was a huge number. I started climbing with Steve, and I didn't really know the grades and things. And so I just wanted to be out there and doing it. And he sort of took me under his wing just because he saw that here's a kid that was psyched, but just had no idea what he's doing. And we would go out and he would try his projects, and I'd try to follow him. And then he'd go, oh, you should try this thing and try this thing. And then at some point, the second year that we were climbing together, Todd came through town, and he was doing these slideshows. And so we watched this Behind the Iron Curtain slideshow where he was climbing in the Czech Republic and went to the Russian speed climbing championships. And it's kind of crazy. Like the local shop in the town would pony up like $300 to pay Todd, and then he'd sell T-shirts and things like that. But really, like living in a truck, driving around, and he, I think, had some gear sponsors at the time, but really nobody had money. And then what was cool was the word gets out, and all of these climbers from all around the state would come to Casper and come to the slideshow. And then the next couple of days, everybody's like climbing at Fremont. And Todd was there, and he on-sighted or flashed many of Steve's 512 plus and 513 routes. And it was really inspiring to watch. And it was cool because Hatcher was there, Bill Hatcher, and Beth Wald was there, and they were taking photos. And so they were there about a week, and he just went through all these classics. And this is like the middle of July, which is not prime season.
It seems like back then they didn't care at all.
I know. I'd like to blame it on global warming, but anyway, he sent a bunch of this stuff, and it was just super inspiring. But it was really cool because I was trying to lead my first 511 at that time, and everybody's kind of hanging out and talking, and I was waiting for Steve to go down and belay me on this thing. We'd been planning it, and it ended up that they wanted to take pictures of Steve on a different route when the sun was in this position. And so Todd went down with me and belayed me on this thing, and I was just like totally freaked out by the whole thing. Anyway, that's how my acquaintance with him started, was that 1 week. And then went on to accompany them down to Salt Lake City when the following week when he flashed Fallen Arches, which was
really
the first 513 flash. It was kind of interesting because there was, at the time and in the 1980s, the tone of the whole sport in the U.S. was sort of pushed through this filter of Colorado through the magazines, through Rock and Ice and Climbing.
Right.
And so depending on what the climbing magazine editor at that time was thinking, it would color what happened in history, which I thought was really interesting. And I know, as we're older, we now kind of see how that works.
Yeah.
But, at the same time or near the same time, Peter Croft flashed Equinox. Or maybe it was Phoenix. I can't remember. But no, I think it was Equinox, because they were like, Todd Skinner flashed this, but Peter Croft also flashed this route, and they're probably both the same grade. Right. And what's really interesting now is we know Equinox is
like 12C now.
Yeah, low end 12D, and Fallen Arches would be the hardest 13A in the world.
Yeah.
And it was just cool to watch somebody that was a total, perfectionist, hardworking climber. And that really inspired a lot of my climbing, both with Steve and with Todd, in terms of like, whoa, okay, this is what trying to do hard routes looks like.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to end up with a mentor that climbs 5'9", and you're
for sure
right ahead of him immediately.
Absolutely.
So then later that same summer, 87, Steve Petra was kind of in this thing of going to do all these 513 cracks. We went out to the Cranor Roof crack, and he did that one. And then he, went off to Salt Lake City to do a couple of other things. And then I went with him down to Boulder to do a route called the 5-year plan, which is not a super well-known climb anymore, but it's a really cool roof crack up in the Flatirons.
Yeah.
And we stayed at Paul Piana's house, and that's how I met Paul. Paul was living in Boulder at the time and went up there with us. And again, here's this like really, just a great guy. And, immediately wanted to talk to me just as a normal, like a 17-year-old kid that, he was respectful to, took time to speak with and belay and suggest, try this on this route and all these sorts of things. And so I really got to where I liked him quite a bit. And then, saw both of them over the next few years around the state. I climbed with Paul as he came back through Vidavoo occasionally.
Did you go to UW?
I did. Yeah, I was there from 89 until about 95.
Got it.
And then inland or in the summers once the limestone took off.
Yeah, I think that's where I first came across your name, actually, was in Vidavoo. A bolted, maybe it was bolted a ret on a boulder right near the trail.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, we did a bunch of those things. And it was interesting because that was when people didn't quite see face climbing yet.
Yeah.
And so when you could see, and I think this is a really interesting thing, that when you're in an era, you can only see the things that are present to you in that era, like all these cracks, right?
Yeah.
And it's sort of like, the Alps now, you're like, well, look at all these arêtes and faces. But at the time, they're just looking at like, where's the snow gullies? And so at Vidavoo, it was all cracks and then a few just like super obvious slabby faces.
Yeah.
But these lines and knobs and edges and things like that were real obvious. And we were there right at the kind of the end of like bolt chopping and all of that, and learned that if we could speak to all of the interested parties, you had a lot lower chance of getting your bolts chopped. Like if you go and pay homage to Bob Scarpelli,
right,
and say, I want to bolt this route, what do you think? He's going to go, oh, that's a sick idea. Where if you just go bolt it and he sees it, he might be like, that wasn't such a sick idea.
Yeah,
right.
Totally.
So, and Lane Kopishka was right at the end of his era. And it was real cool to like see these young crushers coming up. And there's a guy named Matt Kupel, the guy that owns Pitch Six now. He was just like this legendary dark horse that was like, could climb any of these routes we were trying. And it was like, like you kind of didn't see him ever, but that was a really neat era to be in, and following in Todd and Paul's footsteps. It seemed like ancient history to us, but it was like 4 years before,
right?
But in the university terms, it's like this little quick cycle.
Yeah. Was there, when you were in UW and climbing at Vidavoo, was there like the feeling that you wanted to go and do specific Todd and Paul routes? Like, was it like, I have to go do Pretty Girls with Long Knives because they did it, 4th of July Crack because they did it, or anything like that?
No, because the guidebook at the time, which was Kopishka's book, Cracks Unlimited, didn't have first ascent information.
Oh.
But we did want to climb all the 512s. And it was almost across the board that they were routes either done by them or by like Mark Sonnenfeld, somebody that came up from Boulder.
Right.
And so I didn't really know that they had been there as much as just like this recollection that they had climbed around Vidavoo. I didn't know their specific routes.
Got it.
But then it wasn't too much longer. 89, they ended up in the Black Hills, and we, sport climbing's coming on, and if there were bolted routes, we would travel to do, there's a bolted route here, let's go look at it.
Right.
And so we ended up in the Black Hills, and I climbed a fair bit with Paul at that time. Just I'd go up and camp and climb for 4 or 5 days, and we'd go to Devil's Tower and whatnot. And then got to be friends with the Skinners really when we showed up at Wild Iris and started climbing there. And then like in 92, I guess, 91 or 92, I decided to spend the summer up here because there were enough routes. And then I really started climbing with Amy the most.
Yeah.
But was around that crew. And then I got to my first real time I climbed a ton with Todd he was trying to do the direct on Half Dome.
Yeah.
And Paul had just gotten married, and like the week before, and they took off for Half Dome, and they're like, oh, this should be a milk run, and of course it wasn't.
Yeah.
And so after
stretched on for a long time.
Yeah, he was there maybe 3 weeks, and there was a real hard pitch, and there was some, like maybe I should go start my marriage, and so then Todd hired on Nancy Fagan for a little while, but she had some plans, and then it was this whole series of like I think he like went through all of the climbers he could think of in Lander that might want to go. And it was really interesting because I think there's a theme was he at that time was looking for talent, And like, so he called Dussel and he called Greg Collins. He's like, hey, come out. And they're like, yeah, well, I'm trying to do the 10th ascent of a 12C at Fossil Hill. So I'm too busy. And I was working at a river supply company in the warehouse. And I'm in this warehouse, and you're like the only one working in the warehouse. Everybody else is up at the retail shop and as assembling canoes at the time. And the phone rings, and the phone just never rings at this warehouse.
Right.
And he's like, hey, it's Todd Skinner calling from Yosemite. And I'm like, hey, whoa, what are you up to? And he's like, hey, wondering if you want to get out here and climb on Half Dome. And I was like, when? And he's like, well, now if you can come.
As soon as you can get here.
Yeah. And so I was like, not having the best day at work, and was like, all right. So I just closed up shop, went up to the office, quit, went home, told my parents, and packed up my car and drove to Lander. And then I picked up this friend of mine from Toronto, Chris Oates. And you guess we weren't friends at the time. We got to be friends on the trip.
Yeah.
And then we just brought a bunch of stuff from Amy that he needed out there. And it was just sort of like open end. Can you come until this is done? And I really didn't have anything until maybe September for college, which was maybe a floating target anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, we ended up being out there I was out there maybe for 6 more weeks or something. And that was when we got to climbing together quite a bit.
Yeah. Feel free to say no about this, but can I ask you about the controversy of Half Dome?
Well, it was really interesting because Rod Fox was there and shot video. He was there to shoot video of the whole thing. It's really funny because Amy and I have been going through some of this old video, but it's like on mini VHS, which is a hard format.
Yeah.
But what was really interesting, and I'd have to ask Rod, we sort of got to this like, well, let me back up a second. It was Chris and Rod and I hiked up to camp. Galen had been there on and off to shoot photos.
Yeah.
And Scott Franklin was at camp, and he had come up and he was like, let's do this thing. And so it was this group of about the 5 or 6 of us. And then Steve Schneider came up for part of it. Yeah. And what was interesting, and Rod has footage of this like crux conversation around the campfire. And I would love to see it and review it, but it came down to a couple things. First off, Scott is like this unbelievably talented climber. And I thought like his persona in the magazines is like this, like, fuck you kind of guy, but he was so cool. And his dad came up and hung out with us, and he was cool. But he had 2 things. And one of the things I thought was interesting is he's like, one person should lead every single pitch, which was forward thinking at the time. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And we were in team free ascent mode. And so he's like, if you're going to be listed on the first ascent, you need to lead every pitch on the climb. And I'm like, well, I'm out of here because I'm not going to be able to do all these things. But maybe Todd and Scott can both do it. We had to wait for Galen. Galen went off to shoot photos in the Tetons or something, and then come back. And so it was sort of like, let's wait for Galen to try to do the full push. And Scott was kind of like, if I'm going to just hang out here, you need to pay me.
Right. I remember that. Yeah.
And I think the image was like Skinner's like the first real pro climber.
So he was loaded.
Yeah. Well, he had an agreement with Life magazine to do an article on this. They had an agreement with Galen to shoot the photos and share the proceeds from those photos. But I think the truth of the matter is we're slowly, as Amy and Todd, going into debt.
Right.
Banking on the fact that eventually it's going to pay. And so, Todd was paying for everybody's food. He'd gotten all the gear, all those sorts of things, but there was no like, hey, where's my paycheck?
Yeah.
And so there was a little bit of that. And what was interesting, and here's the controversy, is the crux pitch is the 4th pitch coming out of this big, maybe it's like 5'10" or something up to there. You go up a big chimney and some other stuff, but then you're on this slab and it's a 13 plus pitch and you move up onto this sloping ledge, and Todd steps onto this ledge and grabs there's slings at the anchor, grabs the sling from the anchor and clips in as he sends it.
Right.
And we're all like, we have this big like hooping and hollering party, whatever else. And then does the next pitch, whatever. And then the big powwow comes and it's like, well, you need to pay me. There's only one 513 pitch left. We're going to go to the top of this thing, but I'm not just going to sit here. What's really interesting is then like months later when the story comes out in Climbing Magazine is Scott's like, well, Todd grabbed the sling at the top of the pitch.
Right.
But it's on a ledge. Like he's standing on top of this ledge and pulls the anchor away from the wall.
Yeah.
And I thought that was real sour grapes. It kind of made me sad that it came to that sort of thing, because those guys were so awesome to be around. And I still just have this hero thing for Scott. But I was like, man, that sucks, because it's just, it ended up like tainting this thing that was at the time, Scott was as delighted as everybody else, and so anyway, he and Steve took off. Schneider was like, that guy, was the definition of attention deficit at that time. And he was just like, going to run, do a solo speed ascent of El Cap and he'll be back in the afternoon and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so it was an amazing time for me. We ended up staying a while longer to shoot pictures with Galen. But Rod, was there and shot video, and this was one of his first commercial jobs. And so the video wasn't that good. It didn't end up making the cut to sell as any kind of documentary, but,
that's interesting to know that a video exists, though.
Yes, I know. And like if we could, look through, like Amy's got, in her archive somewhere, all of these tapes, and Rod might have them too, but all that aside, I felt like one of the big take homes from that was that we were all part of this team and valued, based on what we could give to the effort. And Todd, I think, came to this knowledge of like, this guy, like I could climb like, maybe I'd done a couple of 513s at the time, but it's not like cranking them off second, go on a big wall. And so I could climb the 512 cracks, but I could jug and haul and belay and not complain. Yeah. And the thing is like everybody on the wall is suffering and everybody's tired from yesterday and everybody's fingertips are split. And if you can just say like, this is the reality of what we're doing and keep your attitude, you're a really valuable partner.
Totally.
And so that's when we kind of started spending a lot of time together at the crags, developing things and whatnot. Because it's the same thing. Like you can be a real tender flower and be a very good sport climber, but very few people that spend time developing routes and breaking trail and going over that next ridge are tender flowers.
Yeah.
And so I think there was a lot of value in Todd finding the people that could do those roles. He didn't need people to climb 514. He needed people that would be there while he tried to climb 514.
Right. With that in mind, what was the partnership of Todd and Paul? What made that special? Because I think, you look back into history and there are these partnerships. There's the Calc and Backer, and then the Piana and Skinner. Those were the two that when I was coming up, it was like my partner and I pretended we were Calc and Backer or Piana and Skinner.
Yeah.
What was it that made those two great partners?
Yeah. I think that they had a similar affect of like loving the whole process of what climbing was about and that like the freedom of being out on the front edge of it, to where, when Paul's like, I found this crazy new crag, you got to come look at it. Todd understood that excitement. And they, and then, they were both well read, both really intelligent. And the thing that I really found touching about Todd as a human being is how much he valued every single person. And I think that Paul and he are similar in that way. There wasn't a lot of pretense. There's like this, Todd had like a public persona as like the cowboy guy and whatever, but really, and he was pretty cowboy, but really he was a super kind, connecting kind of person. And I think that there's a lot of like standoffish posturing that went on with a lot of pro climbers at the time, and still today, obviously. But like, I'm something special. And the thing I think that was really interesting with Skinner is I don't think he felt like he was actually better than anybody else in terms of his ability. He believed fully that you could do these projects that you were trying. He's like, maybe you should try this pitch, and interestingly, lots of us that were climbing with him at the time, and you could only, we're climbing 512, and he's like, you should be trying these harder grades. We didn't believe in those grades, and it wasn't, and you and I've talked about this, like when you and I first started climbing, like 514A was impossible elite shit. You weren't that kind of climber.
Right.
And somehow you had to break down those barriers, but he already saw that. He was like, these guys can climb this grade. And it wasn't until years and years later that, you're like, oh, he was right about, me being able to climb harder than 12D or whatever it is.
Right.
And so I love that. And I think to me, one of the things that illustrates it the most is we were climbing in Kenya, and we just finished climbing the route on Poi, and we're driving back to Nairobi in a pair of Jeeps. And we drove through this little village, and I'm riding, Todd's riding shotgun. I'm riding in the seat behind him. And we stop at this like intersection, and Todd's drinking like a bottle of Coke. And this old dude comes up and he like knocks on the window, and Todd like rolls down the window, and the guy kind of signals with his hand, and Todd hands him the bottle of Coke, and the guy takes a big drink out of it and then hands it back to Todd, and Todd like tips his hat at him and takes a big drink out of it. And then we drive off, and like, I'm like going, oh my gosh, like that guy could have diseases, right. I wouldn't share a bottle of Coke with some of my best friends.
Totally.
Right?
Totally.
But he was just like, total respect for this guy, shared what he was drinking with him, took a drink after this guy did, and we drove on. And it was like, it meant nothing. He wasn't trying to make an example. It was just who he was.
Right. It's not like a camera was trained on him at that moment.
And so I when I think of him, I think of him in that stance more than any other like climbing related thing, or whatever else.
That's really important. When we look back at the record that's kept, the magazines, the videos, it's almost always in the spotlight. So a lot of us do turn on a different persona, when we're in those situations. And it's Todd's moneymaker, right? Like he has to turn on that persona a little bit. But digging behind the scenes and hearing these kind of stories, I think are really important to understanding how they got to where they were. They didn't get to where they were because of their persona. They built that along the way. It's something else in their character that got them to that place to begin with.
Yeah. Well, in 1997, when Amy disappeared, shit, he dropped everything.
Yeah.
I mean, for a year, and that's all he did. And, not a lot of people did that.
Yeah.
He and Amy, that was what they did. They paid my bills. They bought the food. And, you don't get to fake that.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing is like the way that you behave in that regard is really who you are. Like when like there excuse me, there's still people in town that are like I'll see and they're like, don't make eye contact, whatever. And this is like what 30 years later.
Yeah.
But the people that like, man, okay, we're gonna, Amy would just go and get the mail out of my box and write checks for the power company. Not for your power company, but they just took over and, Todd quit traveling. He quit climbing. He quit, all of those things right in the middle of the heyday of his career. And so I think like that was, I mean, obviously we were friends. We were next door neighbors at the time, but I myself see, situations like where something happens and, you have to go to somebody's aid and you're like, whoa, that was a lot. We had to spend the weekend helping these people.
Right.
And, to imagine spending a year just like on the phone and doing all of the stuff you do when you're looking for a missing person. I mean, I don't know.
I remember I was climbing in Vitavu quite a bit at that time, and I remember seeing the posters in town for the call center, you know, like call this number if you have any information.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's a big thing. I complain about helping people move.
Yeah. Well,
it's a few hours.
Yeah. And I think it's just like, it speaks a lot to the quality of both Amy and Todd as people, and there were so many of our friends that threw in for that kind of stuff, but to like be like, this is all we do now. That was pretty powerful. Yeah. And it was close to, I mean, it was like, of course it faded away, but close to a year of like, his almost full attention.
Yeah.
So
where do we go now?
Let's talk about Piana. He was always so cool because he was a little bit older. I think he's about probably 5 or 8 years older than Todd.
I didn't realize Paul was older. Like when I met him, he seemed so like joyful and youthful, and I never knew Todd. So it just in my head, Todd was the older one.
Yeah, no, I think he's like, maybe he's 5-ish years older, but
yeah. Now that you say that, Paul was at UW when Todd arrived there, so it makes total sense.
And Paul had been in the Marines before that, and so he was even he's got a few years there in between, and but he was really cool because he it was interesting because in '88, Steve Petro was like, hey, Todd and Paul are going to go to Yosemite and try to free climb the South. Hey, Todd had tried it the year before, and the year before had been out there with Craig Smith and a few other things. But they were going out and they wanted Steve to go because he was a great crack climber. But they were going before he was done with school year. And so they ended up out there and, did the whole thing. And then the sponsorships came, and Todd was, of course, the primary pro climber, but Paul did get pro level contracts and was able to piece together a bit of a living. And so I was in Laramie, and in '89 and '90, he came back and did, to finish up some of his projects and things. And so I got to climb with him a bunch, and then spent a bunch of time in the Black Hills with him. And he was such a go-getter. Like, let's go look at this. Oh, I saw this thing I want to go rappel down, and just a total explorer and just a lover of those things. And it was interesting because the Black Hills had their own level of controversy of like, these guys chopped this person bolted this should be done on lead.
Right. Well, those like bastions of traditionalism, had to have been going through it in the 80s, especially when there was a Paul Piana and a Todd Skinner who were pushing the limits of this new variation of the sport,
But the thing I loved was going in the Black Hills and you'd be out there and, Paul Meehl was one of the primary ground up, traditionalists, and you in the magazines and in media, it's Piana's over here and Meehl's over here. Right. But actually Piana has a camper on Meehl's property and they eat dinner together every night and they're really good friends.
Yeah.
And Paul continued to, every time we went to trade shows together. He and I were sales reps for a few years at the same time. So we'd room together at the shows at, SIA or at the early OR shows. And man, he was just friendly and kind to every single person. Mm-hmm. It was just really great to see that. And even people where, you in the media or whatever they might be, more traditionalist or whatever, they still are man, that Paul Piana is a wonderful guy. And we don't like that he's rap bolting, but we love him.
Yeah. I love that in his books and in his writing, he's always giving a huge amount of respect to the people that came before.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important part of this because the change, sport climbing, doesn't happen without the people building the foundation that was there before. Yeah. It wouldn't have just appeared out of thin air.
Yeah.
So we've all built on the past. Yeah. Any innovation builds on something that came before, and I think Paul understood that.
Well, it is so true because you look at any level of climbing and even now you look at the media report. I know that the 8A website is trying to still report every single 9A that gets done.
Right.
But it's you got to change, man.
It happens so often.
Next year it's going to happen every 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And I love that. I love that a guy like Tommy Caldwell, can look back and say, I'm, all of these people led me to have this mindset. And then the next set of people are going without Tommy Caldwell, we would never have known the things that could go on El Cap.
Yeah.
And it's a neat thing when people can see that.
Yeah. The divide between the eras, the, traditional yo-yoing and then the hangdog rap bolting, the divide isn't as big as it's often made out to be.
Yeah.
There of course there are the arguments and the back and forths, but really they build on each other.
Yeah. And it's sort of now now we get it.
Yeah.
And it's real interesting. I was bolting and climbing a bunch of routes in the Fremont Canyon area, and sometime around 1990, I was oh, okay, red pointing, I get it. Got to climb from the bottom to the top.
Yeah.
And I did a route, I bolted a route, and then I remember climbing up to the crux and falling at the fourth bolt, lowering down and pulling the rope. I left those first, and we were at Fremont Canyon, which is a rappel in area.
Right.
And we put the draws on because we were red pointing instead of pink pointing, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, I had the draws on my harness, clipped the first four on, fell off, lowered, but left those draws, and then I sent it. And this other climber then came in right afterwards, and he climbed up it and fell at the same crux and lowered to a stance on the route.
Stance, yeah.
And then climbed from there to the top, and he claimed the first ascent because he felt like that because he had put all the draws on, and so that was more important than climbing it from the floor to the ceiling.
Right.
And so I was I was really hurt and mad and just getting, but now I'm yeah, whatever.
It's funny to wade through that stuff. I've spent a lot of time this season in the 80s trying to sort through how first ascents were done.
Oh man.
As the ethics are changing, it gets so convoluted.
Yeah.
The way first ascents were done, and in Wolfgang's notes, he often notes whether his was a yo-yo ascent or the first red point ascent or things like that, and how he actually climbed them, which I find really fascinating. Watching him change from staunch yo-yo to to red pointing.
For sure. Yo-yo is cool, man. I really like that, especially in the gear era, because like a lot of times placing the gear is so hard.
Totally.
I mean,
I'm all for having a top rope
man.
as far as possible.
Well, yeah. And that's the thing. Like we were at Rifle a couple weeks ago, and there was a guy there with a snap together stick clip.
Yeah.
So you have these two full-length stick clips then attached together to make like a 30-foot long pole so that you can top rope the first half of the route.
Yeah.
And as long as you're like, yeah, I wanted to top rope the first half of the route and then just clip the last 4 bolts, and that's my send.
Yeah.
That's okay. But most people want to like be acknowledged for, something different than they do. I wouldn't say most people, but some people do.
Yeah.
And so it's funny. The asterisk is like eliminating the asterisk should be one of your primary goals with sending a route.
Yeah, I've lately been referring to climbing as a game instead of a sport because the rules are sort of malleable for whatever experience we want to have.
Yeah.
Whereas a sport is more like, here are the rules you have to follow, the official set of rules.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's really interesting. Like in the weightlifting world, they changed the weight classes in the early 1990s, I think.
Yeah.
And so then there are all these new world records.
Yep.
And these other records got eliminated. But
they eliminated the old records.
Yeah, they just changed weight classes. Or like the whole thing with pro cycling, which I think is just hilarious, is for the Armstrong era, 7 Tours de France wins, there was just no winner. Right? They just said, because they knew that the second runner-up was also doping. Yeah. But it's hilarious now because, like, thank God nobody dopes anymore, right?
Right.
Like, of course they're still doping. we just don't.
They're just ahead of the testing,
right? But anyway, yeah. The game is like, how do I think if we're not careful, we can say, how do I get away with this,
right?
And not have to raise myself,
yeah.
And so then the true game should be, how can I elevate myself as a climber instead of trying to figure out the easiest way to do this? So it's not like which crag has the easiest 13A.
Right.
You don't want that. You're like, which route is going to develop me the most as a rock climber?
Yeah. And I think you can pick those people out pretty quickly. Like the ones who are trying to
They're
game
staying
the
at Louis
system.
Ranch. Heyo!
Sorry, Louis.
No offense, Louis.
I think you can pick those people out, by the way they interact with climbing in general.
Yeah.
Like you don't look at a Jonathan Siegrist, the way he carries himself at the crag and the things he's doing, and think, oh, that guy's looking for the softest routes.
Well, I know. Well, that it's such an interesting thing. Like these controversial ascents or claimed ascents.
Yeah.
Like the was it Rich Simpson era?
Oh yeah.
Like where there's just like, yeah, I did this thing, but there's no record of it. And like if Siegrist came and said, yeah, I did this 9A, but I didn't get video, you're like, okay.
Yeah.
But if I said that, you'd be like,
yeah, I need to see uncut footage, Steve.
Right. So, yeah.
And 4 witnesses, please.
Yeah, right. And I didn't remember who my belayer was.
Yeah,
I love that bit.
Exactly. I've thought about doing a whole series of the weird climbing lies that are out there.
Well, that's the sad thing is, again, like, where did that lead this person?
Right.
Because if you can get into the mindset of elevating yourself, like, what is if I could seek out the hardest 5'9" on earth and use it to elevate my game as a climber, nobody's going to care if I climb a 5'9".
Right.
But can I become better?
Yeah. I know where the hardest V3 on earth is, and I still think about it today.
Yeah.
I flashed the V7 next to it in the Grampians, and I bet 2 hours total trying to do this V3 and never did it.
There you go.
And I feel like I have to go back.
That's on your life project. It's not like find the easiest 14B.
I have to go back to this V3.
Yeah.
But talk to me. Well, first, I want to go backwards just a little bit and hit a couple of things. And then I want to talk about Lander and what Paul and Todd created here, what they helped create here.
Mm-hmm.
first off, do you remember hearing much about the accident on the Salathe?
Well, yeah, the thing that I thought was when like I heard about it from Steve Petro, that they'd been hurt, but then that was it. And I was like, oh my gosh, like what happened? And then nothing. I just wasn't that connected to them all.
Yeah.
And I don't think he was that connected. But then, read about that in the story in Climbing Magazine. But yeah, so interesting because we still have that ascender, and that was on the lip of the roof,
Really?
the lip of El Cap.
You have it here in town?
Yeah, it's like I think it's probably at Amy's house, but we have it in one of the museum boxes.
Oh.
And it's an old CMI. And I don't know if you remember these CMI
Yeah,
ascenders,
totally.
but they're about 5 pounds each.
Yeah.
And, like they're cut out of a solid piece of steel or something. They were terribly uncomfortable to use. They were just straight handled.
Yeah, I remember that. They were like rectangular.
Yeah. And anyway, Paul was on top, tied to this big tilting boulder, and then he's like sitting there and clips into this pin, and then as he loads this boulder up to haul the bag, as I recall, he the boulder slides and rolls over, and Todd was just coming over the edge of El Cap there, and the ascender was right on the edge of the
right, and that's
rock.
what stopped the rope from.
Yeah, and it rolled over and pushed him off, and Paul thought he was dead. But that ascender is just like this big bent right angle smushed out thing now with all this like frayed rope and
Wow.
squeezed through the cam.
I have to see that. I didn't know that still existed.
Yeah, I think Amy's got it. It may be at my house, but we have these. I have 2 tubs like that are like museum, where you're like you have all these old like Mariacher shoes and what have you, but. That's probably as far as we'll ever get with the museum, but
I need photos of all these things.
Yeah, right. Anyway, so that whole thing was like broken ribs for Todd, broken foot for Paul. That has been a problem forever in his his foot's still like off to the side from that. But yeah, it's one of those crazy, like end of the climb kind of things.
Yeah.
But it was really before I had met Todd at that time, but I didn't, between, mid 87, they did the Salathe in May of 88. And then I didn't see him again until probably 89. Or maybe it was 88. I ran into him at a climbing competition in Boulder at some point, but.
Yeah. I was curious because that story is always like an afterthought or a side note to them sending the Salathe, which I get, but the story's such a huge part of, or the accident is such a huge part of that thing.
Yeah.
And it just seems to be left out a lot of the time.
It could be the only story. Like if you hadn't free climbed the route and you just got, rolled the rock off the top, it'd be like, oh my God, mega.
So, I was just curious if it was in the news back then or not.
Yeah,
so.
No, I heard about it, and then I really didn't hear much about. And again, it was like, I was at the age that like I probably couldn't afford a subscription to the magazine, and so like if you happened to be in a shop and there happened to be a copy laying around, you could read it. And,
right.
But I do, I remember when that magazine came out in and then and that I guess that was 89 or something that one came out probably.
Yeah.
They're a little bit behind the events.
Yeah, I was looking through some Rock and Ices today, and there's an ad in like the next issue of Rock and Ice for the Free at Last slideshow.
Oh, okay.
Like they already had an ad in there for it in the September, October of 88 issue.
Whoa, nice.
But there's no mention anywhere in the magazines of this accident.
Yeah.
No,
that I have, Chris, I have the climbing magazine that has the story, and it has Paul's story.
Okay.
With John Christie. John Christie aided the route with Bill as a belayer.
Right.
And then Bill would wrap back down and take pictures.
I might have to borrow that from you while I'm researching this. Let's talk about Lander. And were you of the camp, because I've heard this from so many people that like Todd convinced them to come here and live. Were you in that camp, or were you, since you were already coming here, was this just the natural place for you to go?
Well, it wasn't a direct sales pitch. It was just like, there's limestone climbing in Lander. And, I was bolting and climbing routes on the granite in Fremont, but we knew what like limestone climbing looked like. You saw pictures of France and whatever.
Right.
And so we're like, oh my gosh, it's going to be amazing. And, the rumors kind of came through that there was climbing out there. And we knew about it. I talked to Steve Petro, and he had been invited up to climb this one weekend. And this was in summer 1990, I guess. And my friend Jed Flanagan and I drove over from Casper, and I remember calling Todd's number, and Jacob Valdez answered, and I'm like, hey, I'm a friend of Todd's, and he told me to come over and climb and to go to Wild Iris. And he's like, yeah, here's how you get there. And so I didn't even talk to Todd or Amy directly. This guy that randomly answered the phone at their house. And so we drove up Limestone Mountain Road, and he just said, you drive along, and at the time we parked at this little wide spot in the road where those no parking signs are.
Right.
And he said, yeah, just there's a wide place in the road after however many miles, and you can park right there. And we drove up, and there's a couple cars parked there, and then you just walk up over the hill.
Straight
and
up the hill.
Oh my gosh, like there's nothing up here, right?
Yeah.
Because like the cliffs you see when you're driving up there, those things that are above the cabins there now, you're like, oh, sick. They're definitely not inspiring.
Yeah.
But I remember like cresting that hill, and you could see, the cliff, and it's a lot cleaner. And we walked straight over and did the Prospect, which is that crack.
Oh, right.
To the
At
left
the OK
of
Corral.
Yeah. No, is it the Prospect? No, it's right next to Devil Wear Spurs, the corner.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, so climbed that. The Devil Wear Spurs had a red tag on it at the time, and so that looked like doable. And I probably got it like fifth try or something.
Right.
But we climbed most of a day there, and then Todd came walking up the cliff, and he was like, "Hey, how's it going?" Like super psyched, like not like, "What the hell are you guys doing here? Who told you?"
Yeah.
And so we were excited, and we came over a few times that summer and climbed. But it wasn't until, and then at the same time, they were starting to develop limestone in Sinks Canyon. Not Todd and Paul, but mostly like Greg Collins and Gary Wilmot and a couple of other people.
Yeah.
And we were friends with Frank Dussel, who had a climbing shop in Laramie at the time. And we started coming up with him, and he actually
What was Dussel's shop in Laramie called?
It was called On the Rocks. It was open for maybe 2 years.
Okay.
And then the limestone started happening here, and he was real into hard climbing, and he was like, "Oh, I'm going to Lander." And he grew up here, but I don't think he really wanted to come back. He wanted to go do his own thing, but man, when the climbing calls, he came back and started climbing full time. And so that's kind of when Sinks all took off in like 91 to 93. And then it was cool because we had, Frank to climb with and Todd to climb with. And so then in 91 or 92, I can't remember which one, I came up and got a job and worked at the Wild Iris store.
Right.
And then I lived at Frank Dussel's house, which now is like, God, it's like, it was just him and his girlfriend. And I was like, "Hey, can I live with you for the summer?" And they're like, "Okay." Right. Like totally like, no sense of like propriety.
Yeah. What's funny, I was just in Wild Iris buying bolts the other day, and Sam was helping me. So
yeah, isn't that
it was
funny?
like, and I was thinking about you working there when you moved here.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, such a fun, like full circle thing happening here.
Yeah, it is really cool. And it's funny because, it was just an enabling, like there was no like, remote work or anything at the time.
Right.
And I didn't want to have a job that was like construction or, I actually left Laramie because I worked a summer pouring concrete and was like, this sucks. I'm too tired to climb.
Miserable. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then I came up here and I was like, Amy's like, do you want to work 3 days a week? And I'm like, that sounds great. And so 3 days a week, you stand around and sell gear, and the other times you're out climbing. And
Well, you said something that I hadn't really thought about. Like when you said, oh, there's limestone climbing in Lander. And you said it in this way that was like excited that there was limestone climbing. And I hadn't really thought about the fact that as it turned from the traditional era into the sport era, that opened limestone up in a way that it hadn't been previously.
Yeah.
You know, it was more granite, sandstone. So the limestone areas in the country, like I guess American Fork was probably being developed around the same time.
Yeah.
And there's a quality disparity between the two.
But the excitement was there.
But exactly. The excitement to climb on limestone.
And the default of it being sport climbing was big.
Yeah.
Like, because you knew that you could climb more climbs per day, harder routes, get physically stronger than you ever could at a crack climbing area.
Right.
And that was the hard thing with Vidavoo. You'd be like, oh, let's do some laps on this, or let's go climb up these knobs. But
you can get in good wrestling shape at Vidavoo.
Yeah, you just knew you weren't getting like real strong, and sometimes you get like 3 pitches in. Like I look back on my journals from those eras, and it'd be like, it did these 2 routes that day, and then top rope this one thing, and and then when we got to Lander, it was like 10 pitches a day was the rule, and it was amazing because you could everybody just took this quantum leap forward in ability. And part of it was that belief.
Totally.
Like as soon as you've done 10 of a grade, you quit worrying about whether you can climb that grade.
Right.
So
in town, I'm curious to know a little more of the like timeline history. So Todd is pulling these people in, climbing at Wild Iris, developing Wild Iris. He and Amy start the store in 90, 91, right around there. When does Paul open? Was it the Gravity Vault?
Gravity Club. 94.
Okay, so Paul opens a gym in town in 94.
Yeah, and he was repping gear before that, and had some amount of an income from 510 and from Petzl at the time. But I think he was climbing 5 or 6 days a week. And interestingly, like he was the only one that was really like, hey, this trail sucks. Let's cut the trees out of it. And these, some of the climbers were developing routes and just like leaving a single bolt with a beaner on them at the anchor. And Paul would put 2 bolts there. And so he was not only bolting routes as his own to develop, but also like kind of the cleanup crew for everybody else. So he was very busy. And then he and his wife at the time, Heidi, opened the Gravity Club, and it was a small, kind of a cool, what was it? Radwall was the wall.
Oh yeah.
One of those like concrete molded walls.
Yeah.
So it was fine, and they had some, a little bit of weights in there and a campus board, and it was a first little community thing,
right?
And that was really cool, and that lasted for, I don't know, maybe 4 years or something.
Yeah, I think those little things are really important pieces. The, opening the shop with one of the goals of opening the shop to give climbers work, to allow them to live here.
Yeah.
And then this community hub that gyms become.
Yeah.
And 94 is still pretty early.
Yeah.
To be opening a climbing gym, especially in a town as small as Lander.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because now they have really good data on that. And like, you go to one of the CWA advisors and they're going to, Climbing Business Journal has these great data points where you're like,
totally,
if you want to make a ton of money, move to Tulsa, right? But it's hard to like go, oh, we want to build a climbing gym in Bishop or in Lander, where you've got really good, weather and really great access to climbing. So
yeah. Well, you categorized Paul earlier as an explorer, and the last time he was here at my house and we recorded a conversation, he was showing me photos on his phone of a cliff he just found, and this little cliff, and he's got to keep it secret,
Yeah.
And I loved the like sparkle in his eyes when he was talking about it.
Yeah.
Can you compare and contrast Paul and Todd as route developers or as like looking for first ascents? And I ask because last summer when I was trying to get to 105.13s, I went through this pretty long period of climbing only Paul Piana routes.
Yeah.
And we were calling it Happy Paula Days. And we would go out and just climb these Paul Piana routes. And it's when I first climbed Arapaho, and I did Totally Fully and Super Platinum. And when you climb a Paul route, and then right next to it on the same formation, you climb a newer route that someone's put up in the last 10 years or something, there's a clear distinction in the care given to making this route a fun, classic route that the community is going to love versus I just wanted to pound the bolts in and do the thing as fast as possible and move on.
Yeah.
So I'm curious the distinction between Todd and Paul, because I haven't climbed as many Todd routes.
Yeah. Well, I think Paul was really this like, he did the interesting thing, which I thought was cool, was he would, most of us put the anchors in, put a rope down and go right down and clean what we can.
Yeah.
He sometimes would put, come off the top, tied to a tree, like 4 feet left of the anchors and 4 feet right of the anchors, and knock off like loose flakes and things like that. So that might be part of your experience where he's like, I don't want like somebody to like do a flag and hit something that's going to come off the wall.
Yeah.
He also was just, I'm looking for the clean walls. Like if you walk down these things, there's really amazing things. You go to Sinks, there aren't that many Piana routes there because they weren't clean. And he wanted the beautiful thing. You walk down there and you go, oh yeah, here we are, burnt beans and coffee, like where you're like, this is a beautiful piece of stone. And so I think that was a lot of it, is just being like, for me, it was always about angle. Like if it's steep, I don't care if it looked like garbage. You knew you could get through it eventually and make it climbable.
Yeah. You could peel off enough of the outer layer.
The other thing is, I think he was, was really smart about bolting, which is like, it's funny, you don't think about it, but he always was like, well, I want to get to the stance. And, he wasn't the tallest climber, but he would reach up and he'd say, like, from the stance, I want to put the bolt where my elbow would be. So somebody shorter than me can clip there. Because it doesn't take much to ruin somebody's experience on a route.
Yeah.
And if I can't clip the bolt from the stance, that sucks. And if it's like just a little bit too scary, or I feel like I'm going to come close to the ground, that sucks. And so he would always put in the extra bolt, and so there's a lot of those experiences that I think he was thinking, what's the next person's experience going to be? And, a lot of local developers here is like, what's my experience? And then I'm moving on.
Right.
There's a guy that's recently developed some routes around Wild Iris that are terrible, terrible routes. They're loose rock, bolts placed badly, non-stainless, anchors in the wrong place, you name it. Like if you were making a lampoon of how to put in bad routes, you couldn't compete with this guy.
Yeah.
But he put in a lot. He was very prolific. And you're like, what do you want out of this? What do you want your legacy to be? And he wanted people to go like, man, I like climbing Paul routes. I want Paula days, right?
Yep.
And so I think there was a lot of that. A thing that was interesting to me, and this is a little bit of an aside, was I remember when Paul did the first ascent of Cartoon Graveyard, and I was there when he did it, and then the next day we're at the crag and he's trying it again, and I'm like, what are you doing? Like, didn't you just send that? And he's like, yeah, but it just didn't feel quite right. Like, I don't think I got the sequences quite correct. And almost more like a gymnast or a dancer, like perfecting a routine. Yeah. Like for me, man, if I make it to the chains, it's done deal. But he was like, he wanted to climb it beautifully. Right. And he is still to this day a very clean, smooth, precise climber. And I really have a lot of respect for that.
Well, I was just out bolting yesterday, and I climbed the route that I bolted. And bolt 4, when I put it in, I originally thought I would be clipping off of one hold, and the sequence leads me to another place, and it makes that hold sort of out of the way. And now bolt 4, I recognized while climbing it, if I were shorter than me, it would be a little bit of a terrifying, you have to do a hard move to get to the bolt, you know? And because it's at Miners, and I know Paul's got so many fantastic routes there, I'm like, I have to go back and I have to move the bolt because that's what Paul would have done.
Yeah.
You know, I want this experience to be the same as the ones I had on Arapahoe and I had on Super Platinum and I had on these things that I held in really high regard. So I think that stuff, for some people anyway, trickles down.
Yeah. Well, there's some amount of value. Like I've done routes where I'm like so relieved to have not taken a really huge fall or gotten hurt that I have some amount of like positive endorphins from that. But I love routes that are just like joyous and you're like, oh my gosh, it was so cool. And that you get up to this cool spot and you do this and it's never like weird or you've got to like, you know, piece it together and whatever. And, you know, trad climbing, we do that all the time. Yeah. But in sport climbing, you can have these really amazing experiences. And it's, you know, the gear's in the right spot. The sequences make sense, you know. Like I think a lot of things that like the classic routes are just ones that don't cause you to go into this weird like, oh my God, I'm so out of whack here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Tell me about Todd as a developer. From the outside looking in, it seems like he was more interested in, I know he loved the exploration because I hear Annalisa talk about it all the time, that they would go out, you know, on these missions looking for new things and she would just be wrangling the kids as nanny, you know. Yeah. But I also think he was looking for difficulty as much as anything else.
Yeah. I think, you know,
which is not a negative. I don't think that's a knock.
Sure.
It's
I mean,
just
because that's
thing.
The thing. Like, you know, you think of like I talked to Jonathan Segrist about like the guy has so few options.
Right.
And that's where Todd was. You know, like the I think that he really was looking for this like next amazing thing. Like we used to talk about going around the corner looking for roof cracks. You know, at the time you're looking for the hardest, you know, crack in the world. And so you'd go around these corners, we'd be out the Sweetwater Rocks and you'd almost be racing each other to be the first one to see the thing. And I think he was really looking for that or just the amazing line, you know, like, you know, the Strawberry Roan, you know, you're like, he didn't care that it wasn't all that hard. I mean, it's hard, but not like it wasn't his like 14B he was looking for.
Right.
You know, at the time. But he was like, that's amazing. And he just wanted to see these things, you know, like he was just, it was cool, but we had walked the Little Po a couple of times and you walk right past the Sweat Lodge. You know, I walked by it with Todd twice and didn't pop my head in there. And then when Rangich found it, Todd was like, damn you, you know, because it's one of these really cool things that he didn't get to see first. And so I think like being the first one to lay eyes on a thing was also really fun. And
when he left so many projects behind. So it seems like he got a lot of joy out of the finding the thing, even equipping the thing. Yeah. And then he was ready to go find and equip another thing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And there's a ton. And I wrote a blog thing maybe 10, 12 years ago about those.
Yeah, I remember.
And then a bunch of them got done.
Yeah.
But then I just started working, and I don't know if Nate and I are going to do a video or what, but of like an updated thing, because there's all these other ones that are maybe not just Todd's, but these like left behind projects. There's things on Devil's Tower that people are still talk about, like, oh man, when that goes, it'll be amazing. There's these lines at Fremont Canyon. What's really crazy, like at Fremont Canyon, Steve Petro and I took and made this list of like the 20 great projects when he left. He's like, I didn't get to these. Let's walk through the canyon and you know, you should do these. I did about half of them. But what's really crazy is I basically left Fremont Canyon 30 years ago, and those routes are still untouched. Like the climbers
Right.
that have come
Right.
since then, there's not, a vision or a leadership that's like, we need to do these sick things. There have been new routes done there, but you go there and there are these king lines that are untouched. And that's so cool. And they're like that at Vitavu. He has a route that he bolted at Vitavu, that is on the Coke bottle formation, that main formation.
Yep.
And it is just this ridiculous, really high, hard technical groove that still I do not think it's been done.
Is it kind of near Panthers of the Week?
Yeah, it's above Panther of the Week.
Yeah.
And so you would climb Panther of the Week, or you could come in from the side. But
yeah, I remember reading about that eons ago and just staring up at it like, whoa.
Yeah, Broken Field Beauty is the and it's funny, we named all the projects, and all these projects have names, not to like say you got to name it that, but just to keep them straight.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so that Broken Field Beauty is like dead center in Vitavu, amazing thing, waiting for the next, the next person to come along and do it. But there's so much distraction now, because there's a lot to repeat. But for us, and for Todd and Paul especially, like doing new routes and exploring is really important. And it's summed up in one of Paul's comments, which was interesting. The pro climber Mia Axon moved to Lander, and worked at the Nature Conservancy for a couple of years. Paul was so excited. He's like, "Oh yeah, man, here's some energy." And he's like, "So are you going to put up some routes?" And she's like, "Well, no, I don't really have time to." And Paul replied, "Well, I don't really have time not to."
Yeah.
And I've always held that, where like we, going and opening up these new crags is more, for me, is more rewarding than doing the 12th ascent of something in the Moss Cave. That's
Totally.
fun. It's great. But I think for Paul, he wanted to be remembered instead of recalled. And you don't get remembered for doing the 12th ascent of, Confession of a Mask.
Yeah. Well, that story, actually, I don't think I ever followed up with you. I asked you last year about Paul's old project at Miners, this tall thing, still had a rope on it when I came across it. And I talked to Paul about it. I texted with him, and I cleaned it up, did the first ascent of it, and it's somewhere around 13C for my size. There's some giant reachy moves, so if you're taller, it's going to be easier. But I ended up naming it "No Time Not To."
Yeah,
because of that story, and it was Paul's old project, and I wanted to keep the legacy of his idea. And I was on my chase for 100, and I thought I could spend the rest of the summer on this and never make it to 100,
Yeah.
But I don't have time not to do this.
Yeah.
Like I have to get this thing done.
Yeah.
So,
well, that was an interesting thing. There's a quote by Christopher Columbus, and he says, "This ground in front of your eyes, it's because of people like me that you contemplate it today." And
wow.
he, and that's the thing, is like, if we all were just coming along in the Conestoga wagons, there'd be nowhere to go to.
Right.
And so there are these people that go out and they are uncomfortable, and they have cheatgrass in their socks, and they're covered in limestone dust.
Yeah.
And they do this like thankless work. And then we all get to come and do the 10th and 12th and 15th ascent, but we can be, like I was referring to earlier, these precious little flowers and be real fragile. But you don't get to go do those things and have a lot of leeway on your comfort zone.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think that's a perfect place to wrap this thing up. I appreciate you sitting down with me. This whole thing has become, it was initially supposed to just be like telling the stories of the ascents, and it's become learning about the people and the choices and the decisions that have shaped this culture that we all live in now, so getting to hear these pieces of who they were as people, I think is really important.
Yeah, I think it's amazing, and it's so fun for me to see all of the the generations of this come along, like the first people that were interested in trying to free things to like, how do we apply this? What's fair game on these walls? And now, I've got some friends that are in the front edge of hard wall free climbing and talking about what is the best possible style that we can do this in, and how do we give respect to this cliff the same way we did when we moved to clean climbing,
Right.
and we moved to free climbing instead of aid climbing, and I just love that it's a continual progression and we keep pushing the sport forward.
1, 2.
Written in Stone is produced by me, Chris Hampton, with help from Riley Rush for Plugtone Audio, a group of the best, most impactful podcasts in the outdoor industry. Secret Stoners, beyond our first book pre-order, just got a bonus episode of Paul Piana telling the story of what happened after the accident on the Salathé. You can join for free at the link in your show notes. And remember, this show is 100% rooted in the facts, but like Todd Skinner always said, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. If you love what you're hearing, give us those 5 stars and a glowing review, join our Patreon, the Secret Stoners Club, and tell everyone you know at the crag, at the gym, and those people who are all about themselves and not the community, send them this episode, and together we can tell the stories of climbing's most important ascents, 1 decade at a time. Secret Stoners. I just took a break from replumbing my shower, and we're doing tile in there, so it's right out of the frying pan into the fire, you might say, as far as work goes. But so far, all has gone well. No leaks in the plumbing. I think I have the walls all squared. It was wonky. You know how that goes. Only one slice on my knuckle from a plumbing fitting. That's it. So all is going well. All is also going well in the Patreon. Big shout out and thank you to all of the newest rock stars, Va Lido, Stefan Norman, Christap Cans, Kurt Williams, Ryan Brown, and Manny. Thank you to all of you. It really does mean a ton that people find value in this thing that they're otherwise getting for free. So thank you for that. I can't help but make it, and it certainly makes it easier to make with all of you supporting. And lots of new free members as well. Thank you for joining. I appreciate that. Book pre-orders are out. If you are a Secret Stoner, it is in the Patreon. If you did not get an email, if you don't check those emails, it's in there. Head to the Patreon link for the book at 20% off of what the eventual price will be is there. And thank you to everyone who's already ordered. Thank you to the folks overseas who are waiting until it goes elsewhere and have told me that the shipping is just crazy. I agree. I get it. I absolutely do not blame you. We're going to try to get distributors for this and my other books in Australia and in Europe, maybe in the UK. So, but if not, it will also be on Amazon shortly after they get sent out to everyone who's already ordered. Now, this was a great conversation with Steve. I don't get to talk to Steve as often as I would like to and as often as you would think living in a tiny town. We really only see each other at events because we're going to different crags where, he has a gym, I have a gym. So our paths aren't crossing as often as you think they might. So it was really fun to sit down and talk to Steve, and I appreciate him being so open in this conversation. He revisited some tough moments, But I do think it really gives a great sense of the humanity of Paul and Todd, particularly Todd in this case. And I think that's an important piece of this. When I first came here and I had written Float, and I came back to record a music video for Float, which features Amy and all her kids, and the nanny for the kids, who's my wife now. Had my daughters in the music video as well. I'll post that up in the Patreon soon, as well as the song Float. I'll post in there as well. But I really came back and filmed that video here because after talking to my wife, now wife, Annalisa, I recognized that Todd was more than just a larger-than-life climbing hero. And I think it's easy to lose sight of that, especially, when I'm doing this thing where I'm trying to tell these larger-than-life stories. So I think it's important to have these kinds of conversations to tell the other side. Also, Steve mentions in this conversation that the ascender is in a shadow box. I went looking. Apparently, Paul had it, loaned it out for a display, and doesn't remember who he loaned it out to. So it's out there somewhere. If anyone has a lead on it, please let me know. We would love to find that. And I'm going to keep looking for it and for other artifacts for that matter. I have recently gathered up all of the plywood from Todd's old Lucky Lane Woody and all of the old homemade holds that were on there. I've got a bin of holds, and we're along with Brian Ryback, who runs Outlier Climbing, makes wooden holds here in Lander, gorgeous wooden holds. We are going to try to use the plywood and some of the names that are written on the plywood, which I think is really fun. We're going to try to use those to make holds out of Todd's old Woody. And eventually we will sell those and to raise money for the Todd Skinner Legacy Fund or for Wyo Climbers or wherever Amy thinks it should go. So lots of things happening on that front. And I know that Amy has some other artifacts that I'm going to be digging into. This is your notice, Amy. Let's talk about that soon. And there's also another aspect of this story that I've been trying to understand better. I don't quite have my finger on it yet, but I'm close. I've actually been talking with Jordan Cannon quite a bit, trying to solve this mystery. And I think we're close. So I'll let you know when I've sorted that out. But Wednesday, we've got another episode coming, one that I recorded over a year ago at this point in anticipation of this episode. And it's a conversation that I felt like I had to have in the name of giving credit where credit is due and connecting the dots between the distant past, the recent past, the present, into the future. I had to have this conversation. And when I went back to edit it just recently, it was so good. And there's a moment in it that I will definitely be talking to you about at the end of the episode on Wednesday, because I think it's a really brilliant philosophy. All right. Talk to you soon.